So this is part 2 of this video on the same problem. And we've already determined summary statistics for both depth and magnitude. And we've talked about the shape of each distribution. And I've already mentioned some of the things like being skewed right. So the next thing that we're asked to do is to draw a relative frequency histogram for both depth and magnitude. First for depth. Now, if I think back to those numbers, remember how distinctly different the depth and the mean and the median were for depth, and look how long the range is for this. This is a skewed right, but very skewed right, I guess you could say. More this shape than, say, this shape. Whereas for magnitude, it was also skewed right, but it just was not as defined as the one for depth was. And so that's what we see here in this next part. We're asked to describe the shape of each histogram. Both are skewed right, but the skewedness was more defined for depth. Again, if I go back and I look at some of these numbers, the large range, the Q3 compared with the mean. Remember we talked, that was part of the choice that we picked up here earlier, how that the mean was even greater than Q3. So there's a really long tail, in other words, for the depth relative frequency compared to the relative frequency histogram for magnitude. So then up next is draw a box plot for both depth and magnitude and decide if there's any outliers. So again, there's this really long tail for depth, so it would make more sense to have maybe even something like this as a shape of a box plot. Remember that the mean was higher than Q3, and I could even go back and think of this as sense of scale here, from 0 to 525. Each of these tick marks may represent, I don't know, 20, 25 points, right? And if I come back to Q1 and Q3 for depth, notice they're around 2 or 3 and 16. So those lines that create the box are going to be really close to the 0 end of this scale. So that one makes more sense for the depth box plot. Whereas the box plot for magnitude, again, let's use the sense of scale here. We have a scale of 7. And well, now actually, as I look at some of these, the scale's a little bit different. Like this one is 0 to 7, and this one's 3 to 7. So let's go back up to our numbers for magnitude. We had a range of almost 7, and we had Q1 at about 1 and Q3 at about 2, and that's where the box will be outlined for about 1 to 2. So if I compare my choices here, definitely not this choice. That makes no sense. That one doesn't make any sense. That one doesn't make any sense. So it's probably closer to this one. And I guess this scale is not exactly 1, maybe about 0.5 perhaps. But notice that that box starts, the left side of that box starts at around 1 and stops about 2-ish, or not quite 2. So that would be a better choice. And then the last one, are there any outliers? Yes, definitely. I mean, we see them here in the box plot. We see them here in this box plot. Those little X's there as outliers. So yes, the box plot for both show outliers. And then determine the lower and upper fences for identifying outliers for both depth and magnitude. For this, there was a small formula. It was 1.5 times the interquartile range. That gives us a sense of how to go below Q1 and beyond or above Q3. So I'm going to go back to my Stat Crunch screen. I'm sorry, I didn't mean Stat Crunch screen. I'm at Desmo screen. I just needed a calculator. So one of the things I need to do is determine the interquartile range, and that's defined as Q3 minus Q1. And this is what the interquartile range is for depth. And then I'm going to multiply that value times 1.5. So now I'm going to take that value and subtract it from Q1. Okay, so that's the lower fence. And I'm going to add it to Q3. And that gives me the upper fence. So lower fence, upper fence, and round as needed in my math lab. So I'm going to do the same thing for magnitude. Come back to my calculator. Then first of all, find the interquartile range by subtracting Q3 minus Q1. Take that number and multiply it by 1.5. Now this special value, 1.44, is subtracted from Q1. That's your lower fence. And it is added to Q3. And that's your upper fence. So I'm going to take those values and place them into my math lab.